She was minutes away from marrying a millionaire, but when a single dad helped her with a flat tire, she realized she was marrying the wrong man. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The road was quiet that morning, as if the world itself had hit snooze. Frost clung to the edges of the maple trees lining the stretch of Route 19, their branches heavy with the weight of late spring chill. Michael Turner kept one hand on the wheel, the other wrapped around a lukewarm thermos of coffee that hadn't tasted right since his wife passed. The heater in the truck sputtered as it tried to keep up, and the box of spark plugs sliding around in the passenger seat reminded him of the 10 o'clock appointment he couldn't afford to miss. Bills were due. Emily needed lunch money. And life, as usual, wasn't waiting. He crested the hill just outside of Maplewood when he saw it. A car, white, sleek, definitely expensive, pulled over to the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking like a metronome. At first he figured it was some city kid who took a wrong turn into farmland, but as he slowed down, his eyes caught something surreal, someone in a white dress, a long one, with lace. And was that a veil? The sight alone made him tap the brakes. He pulled over instinctively, heart thudding a little faster. People didn't wear wedding gowns to break down on the side of the road, not unless something had gone very, very sideways. She was crouched beside the rear tire, struggling with the jack, her manicured fingers slipping on the metal. The moment she heard the crunch of gravel under his boots, she looked up, and time did something strange. Her face, framed by runaway curls and the delicate edge of a veil, was flushed with frustration. And something else. Panic, maybe. Michael cleared his throat gently. "Need a hand?" She blinked, startled, then gave a small, helpless laugh. "Unless you have a spare groom in your glove compartment, I think a mechanic will do." That voice, calm but cracking just a little around the edges. He offered a small smile and nodded toward the jack. "Let me take a look." She stepped aside. "Thanks. I just couldn't call anyone. Not today." Michael didn't press. He crouched beside the car, tools in hand, heart already carrying questions he wouldn't ask. Not yet. The metal creaked slightly as Michael tightened the lug nuts, his breath visible in the cold air. The morning sun had barely pushed past the clouds, casting a silvery light across the frosted grass at the roadside. Behind him, the woman stood in her white dress, arms folded against the chill, though he figured it wasn't just the weather making her shiver. She looked out of place. Not just because of the gown, which was delicate and clearly designer, the kind worn in glossy magazines and upscale bridal boutiques, but because of the way she carried herself. Straight spine, still shoulders, poised, even as everything around her clearly wasn't going to plan. Her makeup was flawless, but her expression told another story. It was the look of someone holding everything together by a single, fraying thread. Michael stole a glance up at her as he wiped his hands. There was something about the way her eyes darted away when she noticed him watching, like she wasn't used to being seen without the armor of status or schedule, like she didn't want anyone to ask if she was okay, because she wasn't ready to admit she wasn't. "You're lucky," he said casually, breaking the silence as he stood. "Tire could have blown on the curve a mile back. That one's nasty." "Lucky," she echoed, then gave a short, dry laugh. "That's one word for it." She tried to smile, but it barely held. There was a kind of practiced politeness in her face, like someone who'd spent years giving interviews, posing for engagement photos, maybe learning which angles made her look softer. But there was no softness now, just something brittle, something flickering behind the calm, like a candle trying not to blow out. Michael leaned against the side of the car, dusting his hands on his jeans. "So, big day?" he asked lightly, nodding at the dress. She hesitated, then looked down at herself like she'd forgotten what she was wearing. "Yeah, or it was supposed to be." Her voice was quieter now, less polished, more real. And in that moment, Michael knew whatever had brought her to the side of this road, it wasn't just a flat tire. Something else had broken too. The tire was changed. The tools were back in the truck. The engine purred softly, as if nothing had happened. But everything about the air still felt heavy, like the silence right after a storm, when the world hasn't figured out how to move on just yet. Michael stepped back, brushing a streak of road dust off his jacket. She stood beside the open driver's door, her veil tucked hastily into the crook of her elbow, the skirt of her dress slightly damp at the hem from the roadside frost. She hadn't said much while he worked, just watched, arms crossed, as if holding herself together required all her focus. "All set," he said gently, nodding toward the car. "Should get you wherever you need to go now." She looked at the vehicle, then at him. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. When they finally did, they were softer than before. "Thank you," she said, her voice almost fragile. Michael gave a small smile. "No problem." But she didn't leave, not yet. Her hands fidgeted, fingers brushing the edge of her purse, then gripping the car door, then releasing it again. "I mean it," she said, "not just for the tire." He tilted his head slightly, uncertain. She glanced down, as if ashamed of how much truth was about to spill out. "I was driving around, trying to figure out what to do. My wedding's in less than 2 hours, and I—" Her voice caught, and she shook her head. "You were the first person today who didn't expect anything from me. You just helped. No questions, no judgment." Michael didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. Her eyes welled with something she quickly blinked away. "You saved me more than you know," she whispered. More to herself than to him. Then she climbed in, started the engine, and paused. For a heartbeat, she looked at him like she might say more. But she didn't. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the wheel. And then she was gone, taillights disappearing into the morning mist, leaving Michael standing alone, wondering what exactly he'd just fixed. The morning sun slanted through the garage windows, catching the dust in golden streaks as Michael hunched under the hood of a beat-up sedan. His knuckles were already scraped, his coffee had gone cold, and Emily's cereal bowl still sat in the sink back home. Just another day, another small fire to put out. That's how life had been since his wife passed. Quiet, steady, sometimes lonely, but always full of motion. There was comfort in that rhythm, predictability. So when the delivery truck pulled up outside and a man in a navy vest stepped out holding a crisp white envelope, Michael didn't think twice. He wiped his hands on a rag, figuring it was parts paperwork, or maybe something for one of the customers. The courier looked around the garage, then approached. "Michael Turner?" "Yeah?" "Delivery for you. Signature required." Michael furrowed his brow. He hadn't ordered anything, but he signed anyway, curious, and took the envelope. It was thick, heavy, the kind of paper you only used when you wanted to impress someone or make a statement. He peeled it open slowly, grease-stained fingers working carefully so he didn't ruin whatever it was. Inside, on creamy ivory cardstock with gold lettering, was a wedding invitation. "Claire Whitmore and Declan Hayes request the honor of your presence. This Saturday at 3 o'clock, Whitmore Estate Garden Pavilion." His heart stuttered in confusion. Whitmore. That was her last name. The woman in the white dress. The one with the flat tire and the trembling hands. Tucked inside was a folded note written in clean, elegant script that somehow still looked rushed, real. "Michael, thank you again. For everything you didn't even know you did. I know it's strange, but I'd really like it if you came, just as a guest. Please, no signature, no number, just that." Michael stared at the card for a long time, his mind tumbling through yesterday's memory. The way her voice cracked, the way she looked at him like he was the first solid ground she'd touched in weeks. He didn't know what she was hoping for, but part of him already knew he was going. Michael placed the invitation on the kitchen counter like it might explode if handled too carelessly. The gold lettering shimmered under the overhead light, delicate and polished, completely out of place next to the chipped coffee mug and unpaid electric bill. He hadn't said anything to Emily about it. She was in her room, probably drawing another picture of a dog with wings or a flying unicorn saving a town from broccoli monsters. But he poured himself some coffee, let it sit without drinking it, and stared at the card. There was still time to forget it existed, still time to throw it away. But just as he reached for it again, tiny footsteps padded down the hallway. Emily's hair was a mess of sleepy curls, her oversized pajama shirt dragging near her knees. She rubbed her eyes, then stopped short when she saw the envelope. "Oh, what's that?" Michael tried to slide it out of sight, but too late. She was already reaching for it. "Hey now," he warned gently. "Careful with that. It's not a coloring book." She pulled it close and studied the gold letters like she was decoding a secret treasure map. "Claire Whitmore?" Her nose scrunched. "Isn't that the lady you helped yesterday? With the wedding dress and the fancy car?" Michael hesitated. "Yeah?" Emily's eyes lit up. "Did she send you this, like for real?" He nodded, and that was all she needed. "You have to go," she said, hopping onto a chair and swinging her legs. "It's like a fairy tale. You fixed her tire, and now she's inviting you to her castle." Michael chuckled, shaking his head. "It's not a castle, Em. It's just a wedding." "But you saved her," she said, dramatic as ever. "What if she needs you again? What if the wedding cake falls over and only you can fix it?" He smiled, watching her excitement. There was no world where he belonged at that kind of event. But in Emily's mind, he was the hero of someone else's story. And maybe, just maybe, part of him wanted to believe it too. The driveway curved like a ribbon of silver, winding through rows of perfectly trimmed hedges and flower beds, too immaculate to be real. Michael gripped the wheel of his dented pickup truck a little tighter, his eyes flicking between the GPS and the towering white mansion that came into view like something from a movie. It stood proud on the hill, draped in ivy and framed by stone archways and glowing lanterns. Emily pressed her face to the window, eyes wide. "Whoa," she whispered. "Is this a castle?" Michael let out a low breath. Something like that. They parked as far from the valet circle as possible, not wanting the beat-up Ford to ruin the luxury car lineup. A man in a tux eyed them as they stepped out, giving a polite nod before returning to guiding a sleek black Rolls-Royce toward the main entrance. Michael adjusted the collar of his only button-down shirt, suddenly aware that his boots were scuffed and his jacket still had a faint grease stain on the cuff. Emily, in a clean pink dress and sparkly headband, looked like she belonged more than he did. They walked up the path in silence, passing marble statues and floral arrangements the size of small trees. String musicians played near the garden entrance, and champagne shimmered in crystal flutes on every tray. Guests milled about in silk and designer heels, tossing compliments and air kisses like confetti. Emily tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, are you sure we're allowed to be here?" Michael crouched slightly, whispering, "We were invited. That's all that matters." But his voice wavered. Every laugh, every perfectly groomed guest, every chandelier hanging above made him feel smaller, like a man who'd accidentally wandered onto a movie set. Still, he took Emily's hand and moved through the crowd, nodding when people looked their way, ignoring the curious glances. Somewhere in the sea of wealth and sparkle was a bride he barely knew, and yet somehow she'd wanted him here. He didn't understand it, not yet, but something told him this day wasn't going to unfold the way anyone expected. The garden was a dreamscape of white roses and gold accents, every inch manicured to perfection. Strings of lights wove through the trees overhead like constellations brought down to earth, and a soft quartet played near the fountain, their notes rising and falling with an elegance Michael could only admire from a distance. He stood near the back with Emily at his side, the two of them quietly absorbing a world that felt like it had been built with entirely different blueprints. Guests laughed over cocktails and compared tailored suits. Servers in black vests moved gracefully between them with silver trays. And there, at the far end of the garden, stood Claire. She hadn't seen him yet, Her back turned as she spoke with an older woman who looked like she belonged in a magazine spread. Claire's dress was different from the one he'd seen by the roadside. This one shimmered subtly with every movement, hugging her frame in a way that made her seem more ethereal than real. But her posture was stiffer now, her smile practiced. A porcelain bride in a porcelain life. Then she turned, and their eyes met. Michael froze. For a moment he wasn't in a sea of strangers anymore. He was back on that cold roadside, looking at a woman who seemed lost in more ways than one. And just like then, there was something flickering behind her eyes. Surprise, recognition, maybe even relief. Claire's smile faltered, not out of displeasure, but like someone forgetting the script mid-performance. The careful composure slipped, and then, slowly, she smiled again. This time it wasn't polished. It was real, small, soft, like she'd been holding her breath and finally let a little out. She murmured something to the woman beside her and began to walk, just a step or two, before stopping herself. Not yet. Not in front of everyone. But her eyes lingered, and the message in them was clear. You came. Michael nodded slightly, just enough for her to see. Emily looked up at him, then followed his gaze. Is that her? She asked. Yeah, Michael said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. That's her. The hush fell like a curtain. Guests turned in their seats, murmurs fading beneath the delicate strains of the wedding march. The sun had broken through the clouds just in time, casting a warm glow over the archway woven with orchids and white hydrangeas. Everything looked perfect, staged perfection, a scene from a brochure. But Michael knew better. Sometimes beauty was just the wrapping around something coming undone. He stood off to the side with Emily, half hidden beneath the canopy of a trimmed dogwood. She gripped his hand tighter as the music swelled. Is it starting? She whispered. Michael nodded slowly. Looks like it. At the far end of the aisle, the guests rose in unison. Claire appeared in full view, her veil fluttering slightly in the breeze. Her eyes scanned the crowd once, and for the briefest second, she looked directly at Michael again. Her gaze lingered, uncertain, unreadable. Then she turned toward her maid of honor, leaned in close, and whispered something no one else could hear. The maid of honor stiffened, blinked. What? She mouthed. But Claire didn't repeat herself. She only smiled, soft and sad, and stepped aside from the aisle altogether. She moved quickly but gracefully, vanishing behind the archway before anyone could process what was happening. At first, the crowd thought it was a rehearsal moment, a delay, something innocent. Then came the confusion. Guests turned puzzled. A few rose from their seats. The officiant exchanged glances with the groom, Declan Hayes, who stood at the altar blinking like someone had just told him the sky was falling. Murmurs broke into full whispers. The music faltered. And Claire? Gone. Somewhere behind the rows of chairs and draped floral arrangements, Claire Whitmore had stepped out of her own wedding. Michael's heart beat in his throat. Emily looked up, wide-eyed. Did she leave? She asked. He didn't answer, because he wasn't sure what he'd just witnessed. But he knew what he felt. It wasn't the sound of something falling apart. It was the sound of someone finally making a choice. The silence turned thick, almost accusatory, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for someone to admit what had just happened. A few guests shifted in their chairs. Others leaned toward one another, whispering behind manicured hands. Somewhere in the back a child giggled, too young to understand the weight of a moment like this. At the front of the aisle, Declan Hayes stood stone still. The man looked like he belonged in a glass case. Impeccably tailored tuxedo, cufflinks that probably cost more than Michael's entire truck. Hair slicked with precision. But none of that meant anything now. His bride had vanished, and all he could do was stare at the place where she should have been standing. Someone stepped onto the altar, an older gentleman with graying temples, and the kind of presence that suggested money and control. Probably Claire's father. He cleared his throat into a wireless mic his voice strained but polished. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "thank you for coming today. There's been a change of plans. The ceremony will be postponed indefinitely." The word indefinitely hit like a dropped glass. Gasps, murmurs, a sharp inhale from someone in the front row. Declan's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. He didn't leave, didn't shout, just stared ahead, like if he stood still long enough, maybe time would rewind. Michael held Emily's hand a little tighter. "Did she run away?" she whispered. He glanced down, unsure what to say. "I think she chose something else." Guests began to rise, unsure of what to do. The spell of perfection was broken. Waitstaff hesitated with trays. Musicians looked at one another, then slowly stopped playing. No one told them to, but the song had ended. And in the middle of it all stood the groom, alone in a garden full of people, none of whom could explain how the most planned day of his life had unraveled in a single whispered breath. The gravel crunched softly under Michael's boots as he led Emily back toward the far end of the estate's lot, where their old pickup sat tucked between two pristine luxury sedans. The noise of the murmuring crowd had faded behind them, replaced by birdsong and the occasional creak of trees swaying in the breeze. He hadn't said much since the announcement. Neither had Emily. But she kept glancing up at him like she was waiting for a punchline that never came. They were halfway to the truck when a voice called out behind them, familiar, quiet, but charged. "Michael!" He turned, and there she was. No veil, no heels, no glittering gown, just jeans, a soft gray sweater, and sneakers that looked brand new but were already dusted with dirt. Her hair was tied back loosely, strands slipping out and brushing against her cheeks. The weight of the dress was gone, and so was the pressure in her shoulders. She looked smaller somehow, but also more real, unpolished, human. And her eyes held that same flicker he'd seen on the roadside. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was relief. "Claire," he said, half in disbelief. She walked toward them, slow but sure, as if every step was another thread cut loose from the life she'd just walked away from. Her hands were empty. No clutch, no phone, no bouquet, just herself. Emily blinked up at her. "You're not getting married anymore?" Claire smiled gently. "No, sweet girl, I'm not." Michael didn't know what to say. He'd watched people leave things before, jobs, families, even life itself. But this was different. This wasn't escape. This was emergence. Claire stopped a few feet from them, her expression soft but steady. "I didn't know where else to go. Everyone back there wants an explanation, or a version of me I don't want to be anymore." She paused, then looked at the truck. "Can I get a ride?" Michael exchanged a glance with Emily, who grinned and gave an enthusiastic nod. He opened the door without a word. Claire climbed in beside them, and just like that they drove away. 3 souls in an old truck, leaving behind everything that had been written for them. Rosie's Diner was the kind of place that hadn't changed in decades. Vinyl booths, sticky menus, and a jukebox in the corner that always seemed to be playing a song from 10 years too early. Michael slid into the booth across from Claire and Emily, who were already sharing a plate of fries like it was a royal feast. The scent of grilled onions and fresh coffee filled the air, grounding everything in something real, something warm. Claire had pulled her hair into a messy bun, and Michael couldn't help but notice how different she looked now. Without the layers of ceremony and expectation, she wasn't just the bride who vanished. She was a woman slowly remembering how to breathe. Emily dipped a fry into her chocolate milkshake and offered it to Claire. "You ever do this before?" she asked. Claire tilted her head, amused. "Dip fries in a milkshake? That feels illegal." Emily giggled. "It's the best. Try it." Claire hesitated, then dunked one. Her face scrunched up in confusion before she broke into laughter, real laughter. Not the kind reserved for donors or photographers. It caught her by surprise, and for a moment she looked like someone who didn't quite remember the last time she felt that kind of joy. Michael smiled quietly from across the table, sipping his coffee. "You okay?" Claire wiped her eyes, still smiling. "I think I am. Or I'm getting there." Emily sat up straighter, clearly pleased with her new role as official mood lifter. "You look like a princess," she declared, "but like the kind that runs away and starts a pancake shop." Claire blinked, laughing again. "That's very specific." "I'm going to call you Princess Pancake," Emily said proudly, as if it was already a done deal. Claire raised her milkshake in mock salute. "Then I accept the title, Your Highness." Michael leaned back, watching them. He hadn't planned on any of this, but seeing Claire in a diner booth with his daughter, barefoot in borrowed sneakers, sipping a milkshake like the world hadn't just watched her life unravel, he realized something quietly profound. Maybe this was what starting over looked like. Not dramatic, not perfect, just three people, a plate of fries, and a new name that somehow felt more honest than all the rest. The diner had started to quiet as the lunch crowd trickled out, leaving behind the soft hum of conversation, the clink of silverware, and the occasional hiss from the griddle behind the counter. Emily had dozed off in the booth, her head resting on Michael's arm, her pink headband slightly askew. He looked down at her with a mixture of love and fatigue, brushing a crumb from her cheek. Across from him, Claire stirred the last of her milkshake absently, the spoon clinking against the glass. She'd been quiet for a while, her expression far away, like she was sifting through a story she'd been avoiding for years. "I should probably explain," she said softly. Michael met her eyes. "You don't have to." She gave a half smile. "I know, but I want to." He nodded, letting her take her time. "Declan," she began, "is everything people dream of, I guess. He's successful, charming in public, great with numbers, obsessed with efficiency. My father loved him. My friends told me I hit the jackpot, and maybe, on paper, I did." She paused, her fingers tracing a pattern on the table. "But I felt like a piece of furniture in his world, something pretty that belonged in the right place, not a partner, not a voice, just decoration." Michael said nothing, but his gaze never left her. "I used to tell myself that's just how things worked at that level. That love looked different when you grew up and got serious. That comfort was good enough. Safety was enough." She looked up, her eyes clear now. But it wasn't. She looked at him then, not through him, not past him, but at him, and it made something in his chest shift. "That morning, when you pulled over," she continued, "I was supposed to be at a final dress fitting. I was stalling. I knew it was falling apart, but I didn't want to be the one who walked away. And then, there you were, covered in grease, hands steady, no smile you didn't mean." She laughed quietly, almost embarrassed. "You didn't try to impress me. You didn't ask who I was. You just helped." Michael's voice was low. "You looked like you needed it." "I did," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen." Outside, the sun began to set behind the trees. Inside, something opened, quietly, gently. The kind of truth that doesn't shout. The kind that changes everything. By the time they pulled into the gravel driveway beside Michael's house, dusk had folded itself neatly over Maplewood. The old porch light flickered on automatically, casting a warm circle over the front steps and highlighting the peeling paint on the railing he kept meaning to fix. Claire stepped out of the truck slowly, hugging Michael's spare hoodie closer to her chest. It was too big on her. The sleeves swallowed her hands, but she hadn't complained once. He watched her scan the modest house, the crooked shutters, the flower beds Emily insisted on watering every afternoon, the welcome mat that had lost most of its letters. If she was surprised by any of it, she didn't show it. If anything, she looked relieved. Inside, the living room was dim, filled with the scent of lavender from the old plug-in freshener and the faint sound of cartoons still playing from the earlier part of the day. Emily was already asleep on the couch, wrapped in a fleece blanket, her cheeks flushed and peaceful. Michael lifted her gently, carrying her to her room and tucking her in with the care of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, each time just as important as the last. Claire stood in the hallway, unsure, out of place but trying not to be. "You can take the spare room," he said quietly, gesturing down the hall. "It's not fancy, but it's warm. Bed's got a decent mattress." She nodded gratefully. "Thank you." He turned the knob, pushed open the door. The room was small, just a twin bed, an old bookshelf, and a soft yellow lamp in the corner. A patchwork quilt covered the bed, the kind stitched with stories and long evenings. Michael paused before stepping back. "My wife made that," he said, almost too softly, "before she got sick. She said every piece of fabric had to mean something." Claire's hand grazed the quilt. "It's beautiful." He hesitated, then offered a small smile. She was. Claire didn't say anything else. She just stepped inside, her fingers resting on the edge of the bed like it was something sacred. That night, while the rest of the world speculated and gossiped, Claire Whitmore slept soundly under the quiet weight of a life someone had lovingly stitched together, one square at a time. The smell of coffee drifted through the house, rich and grounding, wrapping around the walls like an old song. Michael stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with the practiced ease of a man who'd made them too many mornings in a row. The skillet sizzled softly, a few stray drops of batter marking the countertop. Outside, birds called through the early light, and the world hadn't quite stirred yet. Claire padded into the kitchen barefoot, the cuffs of her borrowed pajama pants dragging just slightly on the floor. Her hair was messy, her eyes still soft with sleep, but there was something unmistakably peaceful in her face, like she had finally taken a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "You cook?" she asked, leaning against the fridge with a smirk. Michael glanced over his shoulder. "I survive. There's a difference." She grinned and reached for 2 mugs from the cabinet, already knowing where they were without asking. That small detail didn't escape him. They moved in sync, him flipping pancakes, her pouring coffee. No big declarations, no awkward tension, just warmth, familiarity, the kind that sneaks up on people when they least expect it. Emily entered a few minutes later, her hair tangled and stuffed animals clutched in both arms. She paused in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Smells like pancakes," she mumbled, yawning. "Because it is pancakes," Michael said, sliding another onto the growing stack. Claire set a mug in front of him, then handed Emily a little cup of orange juice. Emily climbed onto a stool at the counter, studying the 2 adults with a squint that felt far too perceptive for a 7-year-old. She took a sip, then looked at Claire. "Are you going to stay forever?" The room went quiet, just for a beat. Claire blinked, caught off guard. Michael looked down at the skillet like it had suddenly become incredibly fascinating. Claire knelt by Emily's chair, tucking a loose strand of hair behind the girl's ear. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said gently, "but I like being here." Emily nodded, seemingly satisfied for now. Michael didn't speak, but as he poured syrup over the pancakes, he caught Claire's eyes for just a moment. And in that silence, 1,000 unspoken things lingered in the warm air between them. The peace didn't last. By midweek, Maplewood wasn't quiet anymore. It buzzed, loud, relentless, and foreign. Michael heard the shift before he saw it. Phones started ringing more. Strangers slowed down in front of the garage. Cars with tinted windows idled across the street. And then came the reporters. The tabloids had found the story, and they devoured it like wolves. Runaway bride escapes wedding to small-town mechanic. Heiress ditches millionaire at the altar, seeks refuge in Rust Belt romance, grease, guts, and gold. The Claire Whitmore love plot. Every headline twisted the truth into something it could sell. Cameras pointed at the garage like it was a crime scene. Microphones thrust into Michael's face every time he stepped outside. He stopped answering the phone. The line was clogged anyway. Half of the calls were customers, the other half asking if they could speak to Claire. He hated it. Hated the way strangers leaned against the shop's bay doors trying to snap a picture. Hated the questions shouted from moving cars. Hated the way his quiet life had been dragged into a spotlight so artificial it burned. Claire saw the first magazine cover while checking out at the local grocery store, her own face staring back at her above the headline, "From Vows to Valvoline." She didn't say anything, just turned it face down and walked out without her groceries. At the garage, Michael tried to keep working, tried to pretend the noise didn't crawl under his skin, but the truth was, it did. Every flash of a camera made him wince. Every customer who lingered too long, not for repairs but for a glimpse of the girl, made him grit his teeth. This wasn't what he signed up for. And yet, through it all, Claire never hid. She didn't run. She stood beside him while he worked, helped Emily with her homework, and brewed the morning coffee like nothing had changed. But everything had. And no matter how kind the town used to be, Michael could feel it, suspicion growing like a crack in the pavement. Because to some people, a woman like Claire didn't belong in a place like this. And neither, they feared, did her story. The knock on the garage door wasn't hesitant. It was the kind of knock that expected to be answered, the kind that came with entitlement baked into every rhythm. Michael wiped his hands on a rag, the scent of motor oil still thick in the air, and opened the door to find a man standing there in a designer coat and shoes that hadn't seen a speck of gravel in years. Declan Hayes looked exactly like a magazine cover come to life. Sharp jawline, perfect posture, every strand of hair in place. But beneath the polish, his eyes were cold, focused. He wasn't there to talk. "Where is she?" he said, skipping greetings. Michael didn't move from the doorway. "She's not something you can demand, Declan." Declan's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "She's my fiancée." "Was," Michael said. Behind them, the side door opened. Claire stepped out, wiping her hands on a dish towel, as if it was just another Tuesday afternoon. "Don't yell at him," she said, voice calm but firm. "This isn't his mess, it's ours." Declan turned to her, expression flickering between rage and disbelief. "Claire, what the hell is this? You walk out on our wedding, disappear into—" He gestured vaguely toward the garage. "Whatever this is, and don't even have the decency to return a single call?" "I didn't owe you a phone call," she said plainly. "And I didn't disappear. I left. There's a difference." Declan took a step closer, voice low. "You embarrassed me. Publicly. You humiliated our families." Claire tilted her head. "You mean your image." He stared at her, something furious sparking beneath his polished surface. "You belong with me. You're not meant for this life." Claire didn't flinch. "You never even noticed I hated roses," she said, her voice quieter now, but sharper than steel. "You sent them to me every week for 3 years. I told you once that they gave me headaches, and you never heard me." Declan's expression cracked for the first time, just a flicker, but it was enough. Claire stepped past Michael, walking until she stood toe-to-toe with the life she almost chose. "I don't need a life that looks good in pictures," she said. "I need one that feels like mine." And with that she turned and walked back inside, barefoot, grease-smudged, and free. By the end of the week, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Cars lined up along the block like it was a Black Friday sale, not an auto shop. People drove in from neighboring towns, some for oil changes they didn't need, others just to take photos in front of the now-famous Turner's garage. A few even asked if they could take selfies with Michael. He wanted to crawl under a truck and never come out. "It's absurd," he muttered one morning, staring at the chalkboard where they usually listed service specials. Someone had scribbled, "Where fairy tales get oil changes," in pink bubble letters across the top. Emily thought it was hilarious. Claire had laughed so hard she nearly snorted coffee. Michael, on the other hand, didn't know what to make of it. "People are coming from 3 counties over." his friend Donnie said, leaning on the counter and shaking his head in disbelief. Some guy from a radio station wants to do a live broadcast from the parking lot next week. Michael groaned. This is a garage, not a carnival. Claire peeked in from the office, where she'd been reorganizing old files and receipts with startling enthusiasm. Maybe it's both now. He gave her a look. You think this is funny? I think it's ridiculous, she said, grinning. But kind of sweet? You fixed one tire and half the state wants to know what you're like in person. They don't want to know me, he said, grabbing a wrench. They want a story. The mechanic who stole the bride. It's catchy. Claire leaned against the doorway, her smile softening. You didn't steal me, Michael. I walked. He paused, meeting her eyes. The look between them said more than either dared in front of a room full of sockets and grease. Still, the fame lingered. Local news trucks came and went. Social media buzzed. The mailbox overflowed with interview requests and sponsorship offers, most of which Michael tossed without reading. But even as the world tried to turn their lives into a headline, Michael kept fixing engines, and Claire kept showing up with coffee and a smirk. Because somewhere in all the noise they'd both found something real, and no camera could capture that. The summer evening wrapped Maplewood in warmth, the kind that didn't come from the sun, but from laughter echoing down sleepy streets and porch lights blinking to life one by one. At the edge of town, beneath a canopy of string lights and fading pink skies, the local creamery buzzed with soft chatter, and the occasional squeal of children delighted by rainbow sprinkles and double scoops. Michael sat on a wooden bench, his boots dusted with gravel, and a vanilla cone melting too quickly in his hand. Emily was a few feet away, spinning circles under the lights with chocolate smudged across her chin, and pure joy written all over her face. Claire settled beside him with a cone of her own, mint chip already half gone, and sighed like the air here finally felt light enough to breathe. She's a whirlwind, Claire said, nodding toward Emily, in the best possible way. Michael smiled, watching his daughter twirl like she hadn't a care in the world. Yeah, she's my reason. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then, gently, do you ever think about having someone again? Loving someone? The question landed softly, but it stirred something deep in him. He looked down at his cone, now dripping onto the back of his hand, and took a moment before answering. I used to think I wasn't allowed to, he said finally. Like it would be some kind of betrayal. She was my world for so long. When she got sick, I didn't just lose my wife. I lost the version of me that knew how to look forward. Claire's eyes stayed on him, but she didn't speak. But lately, he continued slower now, I don't know. I see Emily laughing again. I hear music when I didn't before. I make pancakes for someone who teases me about my coffee, and, yeah, I think about it. Claire's expression didn't shift, but her grip on her cone loosened slightly. That's good, she said softly, because sometimes love doesn't show up the way we expect. Sometimes it starts with a flat tire and pancakes. He looked at her, and in that quiet space under the twinkle lights, something unspoken passed between them, simple, clear, and new. Emily ran over, beaming. Can we get seconds? Neither of them answered right away. They just laughed. And in that laughter, the world felt honest. It was a slow Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sun filtered in through the kitchen window just right, casting warm patterns on the floor like pieces of stained glass. Claire had taken Emily to the park for the morning, giving Michael rare silence in a house that had lately grown fuller, of voices, of laughter, of something that felt dangerously close to hope. He hadn't planned to clean out the hallway closet, but something about the stillness pulled him there. The cardboard boxes stacked high smelled faintly of lavender and dust, untouched since the funeral. He sat cross-legged on the hardwood, wiping his hands on his jeans as he worked through each box. Old baby shoes, birthday cards, faded photographs where time had softened the edges. Then, at the bottom of one box, wrapped in a scarf she used to wear on cold mornings, he found it. A letter. His name on the front in her handwriting, strong but tender. Familiar. He hesitated. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it, unfolding the page like it might fall apart if handled wrong. Michael, if you're reading this, then it means life has moved you past the pain, and if it hasn't yet, I hope this helps. I need you to do something for me. I need you to keep going, not just for Emily. For you. You were never meant to carry this weight forever. You loved me fiercely. You stayed, even when it hurt. But love isn't about stopping. Love is what you give again, even when the past begs you not to. One day, someone will make you laugh in that quiet way you do when you're surprised. One day someone will sit across from you at breakfast and make the coffee wrong, and you'll still drink it. One day you'll look at someone new and not feel guilty. Don't close your heart, Michael. Let it hurt. Let it heal. But let it open again. Be brave enough to let it open. I want that for you, more than anything. Maggie. He read it 3 times before he folded it carefully and pressed it to his chest. And for the first time since she'd gone, Michael let himself cry, not from loss, but from the weight lifting, from the permission given, from the door she left open for love to return. The envelope sat on the kitchen table, bold and official. Claire stared at it like it was a portal to another life, one filled with corner offices, luxury sedans, perfectly tailored days, and obligations wrapped in gold leaf. The logo in the corner was unmistakable. Whitmore Group, her old world, knocking again. Michael was at the sink, rinsing dishes. Emily sat on the floor with crayons, humming to herself as she filled in a picture of a flying dog rescuing a princess. Claire opened the letter without ceremony. They wanted her back. A gracious and respectful return, they called it. A new position, even more powerful than the last. A re-entry into the life she had built, the one she had walked away from in heels and silence. The phrasing was generous, the salary absurd, and the expectation clear. But Claire didn't feel flattered. She felt tired. That night, she sat on the back porch with Michael, legs tucked beneath her, sipping tea under a sky peppered with stars. She handed him the letter without a word. He read it slowly, then looked at her. "Do you want to go back?" he asked. "I used to," she said. "I used to think if I worked hard enough, succeeded loudly enough, maybe I'd finally feel like I belonged there. And now?" Claire looked out at the yard, where Emily's bike leaned against the fence, where the wind played with the laundry on the line. "Now I think I just want to do something that feels like me, something that gives instead of just demands." Michael waited, patient. "I always wanted to teach," she said. "Before the company, before the expectations. I wanted to be the kind of person who stood in a room and made kids believe in themselves." "So why didn't you?" he asked gently. She smiled, the kind that held a bit of regret. "Because nobody ever told me I could." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You don't need permission anymore." A week later, Claire applied to the local university's teaching program. No press release, no grand announcement, just a woman choosing her own future for the first time, and a classroom full of possibility waiting on the other side. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the kind that made the whole town feel like it had slowed down just enough to breathe. The garage was quiet, the tools put away early, and the scent of grilled cheese and tomato soup drifted through the house like a warm memory. Claire was helping Emily at the kitchen table, a paper grocery bag spread out beneath the mess of crayons, glue sticks, and construction paper. Michael leaned in the doorway, watching them without a word. Claire's hair was pulled into a loose bun, a smear of red crayon on her cheek that she hadn't noticed. Emily, tongue slightly sticking out in concentration, was putting the finishing touches on a drawing with the same intensity she usually reserved for pancake toppings. "There," she said proudly, holding it up. "All done." Claire leaned closer. "Let's see it, kiddo." The picture was bold and bright, childlike but full of heart. 3 stick figures stood under a big lopsided red heart. One had wild curly hair and a wrench in his hand. Another had a swirl of long brown hair and what looked like a coffee mug. And in the middle stood a smaller figure with pink shoes and arms stretched wide. Above them, in wobbly block letters, Emily had written, "My family." Claire's breath caught just a little. Michael stepped forward slowly, kneeling beside the table to get a closer look. "Who's that?" he asked, gently pointing to the taller woman on the right, though he already knew the answer. Emily giggled. "That's Claire, duh." Claire blinked fast, swallowing something thick in her throat. "And the guy with the wrench?" "You, Daddy?" She beamed. "You always have a wrench." He nodded, his voice soft. "And the one in the middle?" "Me," she said, matter of fact, "with my sparkle shoes." Michael smiled, but before he could say anything else, Emily tilted her head and asked, "It's us, right? This is what we are now?" The silence that followed was tender, heavy, honest. Claire reached across the table, placing her hand gently over Emily's. "Yeah, sweetheart," she whispered. "It's us." And just like that, with crayons and construction paper, a new chapter of their story was written. No signatures, no vows, just love, plain and certain, drawn in bright colors by a little girl who already understood what family really meant. The community center smelled like cinnamon, roasted peanuts, and something fried. It buzzed with the energy of folding chairs scraping across hardwood, middle school band tunes slightly off-key, and the laughter of people who'd known each other their whole lives. The annual Maplewood Gala wasn't glamorous, not in the way Claire Whitmore used to define it. But as she stood behind the dessert table, wearing a borrowed apron and handing out slices of cherry pie, she felt more at home than she had in any ballroom. Michael stood across the room, deep in conversation with one of the town's retired firefighters, his hand resting casually on Emily's shoulder as she bobbed her head to the music. Claire watched them with a quiet smile before turning back to the long line of guests. "Extra whipped cream?" she asked an elderly woman, who gave her a wink. "Darling, don't be shy with it." Claire obliged, laughing as the whipped cream towered precariously. "We live dangerously here." The woman grinned. "You're the one who ran off from the wedding, right?" Claire froze for a fraction of a second, then nodded with grace. "Guilty." "Good," the woman said, tucking her fork into the pie. "That man of yours? He's got kind eyes. You chose right." Claire blinked, something warm, settling behind her ribs. No one introduced her as the Whitmore heiress that night. No one asked her to speak or sit at a special table. She didn't bring a donation check. She brought her hands, her smile, and a willingness to work. She helped clear tables, refill lemonade pitchers, and carry toddlers too sleepy to keep their heads up. By the end of the night, her feet ached and her apron was streaked with pie filling, but her face glowed with something freer than perfection: belonging. As the final song played, Michael found her outside on the steps, sipping sweet tea and gazing up at the stars. He handed her a clean towel for her hands and sat beside her, quiet and close. "You clean up nice," he said. Claire looked at him, eyes full. "You know, I've never laughed this much while covered in cherry pie." And Michael, grinning, replied, "That's how we know you're one of us now." The morning sun stretched lazily over Maplewood, casting soft gold over the backyard as birds flitted between the trees and dew clung to the grass like tiny stars. Michael carried a tray of pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, navigating around balloons taped to cabinets and the streamers Emily had insisted on hanging herself, most of them crooked, all of them perfect. "Don't let them lose their tails this time," Emily warned from the kitchen table, eyes sparkling. "Yes, ma'am," Michael said, grinning. Claire stood by the back door, hands tucked in her hoodie pockets, a quiet excitement dancing behind her eyes. She hadn't slept much the night before, not from nerves, but from the weight of a plan she hoped would land just right. When Emily had mentioned weeks ago that she missed her old treehouse, the one storm damage had ruined years ago, Claire had taken note. She remembered how Emily's voice dipped into something wistful, how she glanced at the broken beams like they were bones of a forgotten dream. So Claire had rebuilt it, quietly, secretly, with borrowed tools, local help, and late-night trips to the lumber store. She even found a way to keep the original sign, Emily Sky Castle. The new one now read beneath it in fresh paint, built by love. After breakfast, Claire slipped out and waited by the tree, calling up softly, "Emily, come outside. I've got something for you." The moment Emily saw it, she gasped so loudly, Michael dropped a fork. She ran across the yard barefoot, hands covering her mouth as she stared up at the gleaming wooden structure, now with windows, cushions, and even twinkling lights strung around the railing. "Is this mine?" "All yours," Claire said, kneeling beside her. "Want to go up?" Emily didn't answer. She just hugged Claire tight, then bolted up the ladder like the treehouse had been waiting for her this whole time. Michael followed after, slower, a little stunned. At the top, in the small, cozy room Claire had built with more heart than wood, she was waiting with 2 mugs of coffee and a nervous smile. "Happy birthday to your girl," she said, holding out a cup. Michael took it, his fingers brushing hers. "She's not the only one who got what she wished for," he said quietly. Claire didn't reply. She just sat beside him, watching the sunrise from Emily's new sky. The treehouse glowed like a lantern in the dark, its soft fairy lights twinkling against the midnight blue sky. Emily had fallen asleep curled up in a nest of blankets and pillows, her birthday crown still tilted on her head, a half-eaten cookie in one hand. The sounds of the backyard, the crickets, the wind rustling through the leaves, murmured like a lullaby around them. Michael leaned against the wooden railing, coffee long gone cold beside him, eyes tracing constellations he used to know the names of. Beside him, Claire sat cross-legged, knees touching his, the kind of silence between them that didn't need filling. She watched him in the dim light, her heart loud in her chest. He wasn't like anyone from her past life. He didn't need to be. He was steady where others had been loud, quiet where others had been sharp, and the way he looked at her, it made her feel like the whole world had stopped spinning just long enough to let her catch her breath. "I used to think this kind of night only happened in movies," she said softly. Michael looked over. "Tree houses and stargazing?" "No," she said, smiling. "Peace." He didn't respond with words, just let the moment hold them. Then Claire shifted slightly, turning toward him. "I need to say something." Michael's brows lifted. "Okay." She reached out, fingers brushing his. "You're not a detour." The words came quietly, but they landed like truth. "I know I crashed into your life with cameras and chaos and more baggage than a person should carry. But I need you to know this isn't me hiding or recovering or figuring things out. It's me choosing." Michael's throat tightened. "You're not where I ended up by accident," she whispered. "You're where I was always supposed to find peace." He didn't get a chance to say anything. Claire leaned in, eyes searching his one last time. Then she kissed him. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't unsure. It was the kind of kiss that settled everything. The stars above them blinked quietly, and somewhere below, the world kept spinning. But in that little wooden sky castle, they were already home. The whispers started slow, quiet enough to ignore, easy enough to brush off. A few offhand comments at the diner, a couple of customers canceling last minute, vague excuses about trying someplace new. But then came the murmurs with names attached. Larry Grayson, owner of Grayson Auto, started offering discounts to anyone who didn't want their car fixed by a soap opera, and suddenly the damage wasn't invisible anymore. Customers trickled in less and less. The phone stopped ringing as often. Even regulars hesitated, offering sheepish smiles and avoiding eye contact. Michael could see it on their faces. They didn't want to believe the rumors. But small towns are hungry places, hungry for gossip, hungry for heroes, hungrier still to tear them down. Claire heard it too, at the grocery store, in passing glances, on local blogs painting Michael as a man who strategically stole the heart of a billionaire bride to save his dying business. They called it calculated, convenient. Some even claimed the whole wedding walkout was staged. Michael didn't say much. He just started coming home later, spending more time at the shop, alone, fixing things that didn't need fixing. Claire brought him dinner, and he'd thank her, eat 2 bites, then say he had paperwork. She knew what he was doing. One night, as they stood in the kitchen rinsing dishes in silence, she said it out loud. "You're pulling away." He dried a plate slowly. "I'm trying not to drag you into something you don't deserve." Claire leaned on the counter. "You think I care what they're saying?" "You should," he said, quieter now. "You worked hard to build a life with your name clean. I don't want to be the reason it gets muddy." Claire stepped closer, frustration and love warring in her voice. "You didn't do anything wrong, Michael. You fixed a tire. You told the truth. You showed me what real looks like. Why should you have to shrink now just because it makes someone else uncomfortable?" But he didn't answer, just looked away, jaw tight. That night, he didn't sleep in the bed beside her. And though she didn't say a word about it, Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying not to wonder if love could still survive the noise. The Maplewood Town Hall smelled like coffee and furniture polish, with folding chairs arranged in neat, hopeful rows and a microphone at the front that always squeaked once before settling. The monthly community meeting had never drawn much excitement. Zoning updates, bake sale announcements, the occasional debate about potholes. But tonight, the room was packed. Not for civic duty, for curiosity. Claire could feel the eyes on her the moment she stepped inside. Conversations paused mid-sentence, heads turned, whispers stirred like dry leaves. Michael didn't come. She hadn't asked him to. He'd been slipping further away, shoulders a little heavier each day. But she was done watching the town define his worth with half-truths and headlines. When they opened the floor for announcements, Claire rose quietly and made her way to the front. Some recognized her instantly. Others looked surprised to see her in jeans and a cardigan, instead of the perfectly pressed clothes they'd imagined a billionaire heiress wore. She stood at the mic, heart steady, breath even. "My name is Claire Whitmore," she began, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the hum of the room. "I know most of you know of me, even if you don't know me. That's fair. I walked into this town with a past people love to stretch into a story." A few uncomfortable shifts in the crowd, a cough, silence. "I came here as a runaway bride. That part's true. What isn't true is the part that's been whispered in corners and painted in rumor, that Michael Turner somehow used me, that he tricked me, or chased me, or turned my life into a business deal." She paused, letting the tension settle. "Michael didn't steal me from anyone. He reminded me who I was before the world told me what I should be." Her voice wavered just slightly, but she didn't stop. "He didn't ask for my money. He didn't ask for my name. He gave me a ride, a safe place to land, and pancakes when I didn't know how to start over. And I won't let anyone reduce that kind of kindness to a headline." A beat passed. Then another, and then slowly someone began to clap. It started at the back, then more joined in. And by the time Claire stepped down, the town wasn't silent anymore. For the first time in a long time, Maplewood listened with its heart. The lake was quiet in that way only early evening could bring, a hush that wrapped around the water like a secret. The surface shimmered, kissed by the last golden threads of sunlight, and the dock creaked softly beneath Michael's boots as he stepped out, hands tucked deep in his pockets. Claire followed a step behind, her eyes taking in the view with gentle awe. "This is where I used to bring Emily," he said, voice low, "and Maggie, before everything changed." Claire nodded, her gaze drifting over the rippling water. the outline of the old wooden swing still tied to a tree at the edge of the shore. It looked like a memory caught in time. Michael exhaled. "I brought you here because I needed to say something that I should have said days ago." She turned to him, waiting. "I'm sorry," he said, "for pulling away, for letting other people's noise get inside my head. I didn't know how to protect something this good without ruining it." Claire didn't interrupt. She just let him speak because this was a wound he needed to open himself. "I've lost before," he continued, "and when things started to go wrong again, I guess I thought, maybe this was too good to last. Maybe I didn't deserve it." His voice cracked slightly. "But you stood up for me, even when I didn't stand up for myself." Claire stepped closer, close enough that the wind caught her hair and brushed it across his shoulder. She took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "I wasn't asking for perfect," she said. "I was asking for honest. And you've always given me that, even when it hurt." Michael looked at her, the weight of the apology still thick in his chest. Claire squeezed his hand. "I forgive you." They stood there in silence, the lake gently lapping at the shore like it was breathing with them, washing away the past one ripple at a time. Above them, the sky deepened into soft violet, stars beginning to prick the horizon like tiny promises. No more running, no more pulling back, just two hearts finding each other again, this time with nothing between them but the quiet. The morning sun had just broken over the rooftops of Maplewood, casting long shadows across the gravel lot outside the garage. The air smelled of fresh-cut wood and sawdust, mixing with the familiar scent of motor oil and the faint promise of rain. Michael stood beside the ladder, squinting up at the new sign as Donnie tightened the last bolt. It was simple, crafted from reclaimed oak, sanded by hand, and finished with just enough varnish to make the lettering shine. No neon, no flash, just words that mattered. Turner and Whitmore, honest auto built on trust, fueled by heart. Michael stepped back, hands on his hips, trying to ignore the lump rising in his throat. Claire stood beside him, arms crossed, lips pressed together in that soft, proud smile she wore when words would only get in the way. "You like it?" she asked, nudging him gently. He nodded slowly. "It's more than I ever expected." "You deserve more than you expected," she said, and meant it. The sign wasn't just a name, it was a declaration, one built from every scraped knuckle, every second chance, every late night fixing cars and learning how to love again. It was a bridge between where they'd been and what they'd built together. No fame, no fortune, just truth. Locals began to notice as they drove by, slowing down to read the words, to take in the quiet way something had shifted. There was no grand reopening, no ribbon to cut. But there didn't need to be. The message was loud enough. Inside, Emily had already started organizing the waiting room, rearranging the worn chairs and setting out a fresh plate of chocolate chip cookies Claire had baked that morning. She wore a new headband and a grin that wouldn't quit. When a customer walked in later that day, a woman whose car had stalled near the high school, Michael greeted her at the door with a clean rag in his back pocket and a familiar calm in his eyes. "Welcome," he said. "You're in good hands now." And outside, beneath the weight of nothing but honesty, the sign stood steady in the wind. The scent of grilled corn and smoked ribs drifted lazily through the backyard, winding between picnic tables covered in checkered cloths and mason jars filled with sweet tea. Kids chased each other barefoot through the grass, laughter skipping through the air like music. There were no tuxedos, no champagne towers, no string quartets. Just the warm crackle of a fire pit and the sound of people who loved each other showing up, jeans, flannel, and all. Michael stood under the old oak tree, the same one where Emily used to string up tire swings and dreams. His shirt was clean, tucked in for once, sleeves rolled to the elbow. His hands weren't shaking, but his heart beat a little faster than usual. Not out of nerves, but because he finally knew what certainty felt like. Claire walked across the yard with Emily at her side, one in a borrowed ivory sundress, the other in sneakers and a pink headband, proudly clutching a bouquet of fresh daisies. No veil, no makeup team, just sunlight catching in Claire's hair and the kind of smile you only wear when nothing in the world feels missing. They met under the tree, in front of a small circle of folding chairs filled with friends, neighbors, and one woman holding a casserole dish she refused to put down. There was no officiant, no script, no line for "Pa till death do us part." Just Claire taking Michael's hands in hers and looking at him like the whole town had disappeared. "I don't have vows," she said quietly. "I just have this life, and I want to share it with you." Michael's voice caught a little when he spoke. "You walked into my world without warning and made it feel like home again." Beside them, Emily beamed, swaying side to side with her bouquet, whispering loudly, "You can kiss now." So he did. The guests cheered, someone popped a soda can, and someone else cried into a napkin. It wasn't grand. It wasn't formal. It was a wedding without vows. Just three people standing in a backyard, choosing each other in the clearest way they knew how. And it was perfect. The tire rim sat in the corner of the garage for months, gathering dust and leaning against a stack of old parts that Michael kept meaning to sort through. It was bent, slightly rusted, and completely ordinary to anyone who didn't know the story. But to Claire, it was sacred. Not because of what it was, but because of what it started. One quiet Sunday, while Michael and Emily were planting tomatoes in the backyard, Claire slipped into the garage with a rag, some polish, and a small brass plaque she'd ordered in secret. She cleaned the rim carefully, wiping away the grime like it was something delicate. Then she mounted it in a shadow box frame, the metal gleaming faintly behind the glass. At the bottom, centered beneath it in simple engraved script, was the plaque, for the moment that made everything else possible. She hung it in their living room, just above the bookshelf where Emily kept her school trophies, and Michael stored dog-eared repair manuals. No gold leaf, no spotlight. Just a quiet testament to the split-second decision on a cold morning, the one where a stranger pulled over, offered help without hesitation, and unknowingly rewrote the next chapter of all their lives. When Michael saw it, he stopped mid-step. His eyes softened as he walked over, brushing his fingers lightly against the edge of the frame. "You really saved this old thing?" he asked. Claire smiled, folding her arms. "It's the most important thing I've ever owned." He turned to her, head tilting. "Because it stranded you?" "No," she said, stepping closer. "Because it brought me to you." Emily wandered in a moment later, glanced up at the frame, and tilted her head. "That's the tire?" she asked, as if it were a relic from a fairy tale. Michael nodded. "That's the one." Emily grinned. "Then we should keep it forever." And they did. Because sometimes the biggest miracles don't come wrapped in fireworks or fate. Sometimes they arrive in a busted tire on a cold morning in a town where nothing was supposed to change. And then everything does. The classroom was bright with morning sun, filtered through tall windows that creaked in the wind. Posters lined the walls, quotes about kindness, drawings from students, and faded construction paper stars still clinging to their corners. Claire stood at the front of the room, a stack of vocabulary quizzes in one hand, a chalk smudge on her blouse, and a warm smile tugging at the edges of her face. It was story day, something she always did before winter break. A tradition where students asked for one real-life tale in place of grammar drills. She pretended to protest every year, but she never meant it. Today, though, one of the newer students raised a hand with wide, curious eyes. "Miss Claire," the girl asked, "how did you meet your husband?" Claire paused. There it was. She glanced at the board, then back at her students. "That's not a short story," she said with a chuckle. "Is it true you were, like, famous?" another kid blurted out. A ripple of laughter danced across the room, but Claire nodded, her tone thoughtful. For a minute, yes, but not for anything I was proud of at the time. She set the quizzes down and leaned against the edge of her desk, folding her arms. Years ago, she began, I was on my way to a wedding. My own, actually. I had the dress, the ring, everything planned down to the flavor of the cake. But I was also driving in circles, scared out of my mind. And then my car got a flat tire on the side of a quiet road. The room went still. And this man pulled over, she continued, eyes far away now, wearing jeans covered in grease, with a little girl in the back seat. He didn't ask for my name, didn't ask why I was crying. He just fixed the tire and told me to drive safe. A long pause, then she smiled gently. I didn't go to the wedding, she said. I went back to find the mechanic. The kids leaned in, jaws slack. Why, one boy asked. Claire's voice was soft but sure. Because he didn't save my wedding. He saved my life. And in that classroom, filled with chatter and crayon stains, the story lived on, proof that the smallest kindness can reroute a destiny. Dust hung in the attic like a memory, soft, golden, and untouched. The air was still, disturbed only by the creak of floorboards under Emily's quiet steps. She was 17 now, tall and strong like her father, with Claire's eyes and a mind sharp enough to challenge both of them. She'd come up looking for an old yearbook, maybe a box of photos for a school project. What she found instead was the garment bag. It was tucked carefully behind holiday decorations and boxes labeled Emily's Art, age 5, and garage receipts. Don't toss. The bag was long and pristine, untouched for years. Emily pulled it forward slowly, unzipped it, and stepped back. Inside was a wedding dress, not the one Claire had worn in the backyard beneath the oak tree, laughing with daisy petals in her hair. This one was stiff, flawless, heavy with silk and history. Emily traced her fingers down the bodice, her brow furrowed. Downstairs, the kettle began to whistle. She carried it down in her arms like it was something delicate and sacred, setting it gently across the dining room table. Claire looked up from the kitchen, her tea forgotten as she saw it. Emily asked the question without hesitation. Was this really yours? Claire came closer, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She rested her palm lightly on the fabric, as if feeling the weight of a woman she no longer was. Yes, she said quietly. Once. Emily tilted her head. Why'd you keep it? Claire smiled. Not sad, not wistful, just knowing. Because it reminds me of the path I didn't take, of the life I almost chose because I was scared to choose something real. She looked at Emily, the girl who had once danced under string lights with chocolate on her face and declared herself part of a family with crayons and construction paper. Because that dress was the start of my no, Claire said, and because I found something better. Emily grinned. Dad? Claire nodded. And you. Outside, the wind rustled the backyard oak, its branches swaying like a quiet reminder of all the ways love rewrites the future.